Hello, all, and welcome to 92,000 Hours, the podcast where we acknowledge that we spend more of our lives at work than we do anything else. So let's explore how we can do our best to create purpose and meaning in those significant hours that we spend working. I'm so glad you're joining us today because this podcast will be a treat. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Dale Whittaker. Dale is the advisor and principal officer in post-secondary success at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's also a past president, provost, faculty member, and overall leader at many significant public research universities. He is someone I just love to speak with and listen to, and I think you will too. And today, he is speaking with us about intention. Okay, I'm so excited. I am so thrilled to have Dale Whittaker join us on the podcast. Dale, you have been someone I enjoy working with professionally and also have looked up to as just a human. And so I'm honored that you would be willing to do this with me today. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm honored you asked.
Well, as
and
you
I know
know,
it's going to be fun, Annalisa.
It's going to be fun, and I have no idea where this is going to go. So how much fun is that? It's an adventure. But I do know the first question, and I gave you a little bit of a heads up, which is the one I ask everyone, and it's very me, which is, let's just get real right away. And so if you remove any reference to work or maybe even volunteerism or sports, like the things that you do, and we focus instead on who you are, what are you most proud of about yourself as a person?
I struggled with the word proud, Annalisa, because of the way that I was raised. So, but I understand the question. Yes. And I think that I asked myself the question sort of like, where's your sweet spot and what makes you feel best? And the part that I'm most proud of is being fascinated in people's stories and believing in people. And in so many ways that has, come back to as a gift to me over and over and over again. But it's something that is natural. It's like you. It's something that's natural and makes me happy.
Do you have any examples of that fascination and something that is like a story that would tell us why it's meaningful to you?
I have many, so many thoughts. Well, I'll just tell you one that just happens to pop to mind.
Great.
When I was in Florida and I was a provost of a university, I like to get out of the campus area and get downtown to coffee shops so I could think. And there was another person in there that early on, a Latina woman, her name was Wanda Ramundi Ortiz. And Wanda was working on this big pile of stuff. And I could tell, and she was stressing, and I could tell that it was like promotion and tenure looking stuff. And so I just asked her about it. And, she was feeling, am I good enough? Do I want to do this? Am I going to push through this? And we talked later. She found out I was provost, because I wasn't there to help her in that role. I was here because I was really interested in her, but I really wanted to encourage her. She was an art faculty in a technical university. Huh. And now she's doing very well. She's a full professor now at a different university. She's exhibited at major art galleries. And once she got over the hump, it was just fun to watch her confidence bloom.
It's so interesting. I had this conversation once with a woman who was the president of a community college. And I was asking her about becoming the president of the community college. And for so many of us, and her included, she talked about how important it was to have other people tell her that they believed in her. Sometimes we need that. And it's interesting how you showed up for that woman in that moment when she needed that boost that, yes, she is in fact good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the reasons that I loved being around universities was because people were always becoming. You know, they were never like I've made it. Everybody had a dream or an idea or a struggle, but there was always a future in front of them. And it was so fun to be part of that, to learn about it, and to encourage them.
Okay, so that kind of gets to what we're talking about today, because in some ways, those might link together. Or maybe you'll tell me if they do, but they kind of do. So, we always have a theme, and today we were talking about intention. And of course, I looked it up. It's funny because the definition of intention is not helpful at all. It said what one intends to do or bring about, which is not helpful. So,
recursive definition.
yes, exactly. And I was thinking, it does. I mean, that word, if we think about it, is laden with meaning for most of us. So what does it mean to you, and why were you interested in talking about that today?
Me, at least, it's the opposite of intention is sort of frantic, random, short-term activity focused on process and maybe bureaucracy without clarity of why and to what end. So for me, so let me try, as opposed to using a recursive definition or an inverse definition. So let me try that in the positive. Intention is about acting with purpose, and trying to have or seek clarity about to what end you're doing everything that you're doing.
I love that so much. And I'm going to tell you an embarrassing story, which is many moons ago when I was in college. I had this guy that I liked very much. He was fun. We hung out together all the time. But I never dated him. And one day he took me to lunch and said, "Why are we not dating? We hang out all the time. Like, what is happening that this isn't working between us?" And he was handsome and fun and interesting. And I remember at the time I thought, I feel like your life just happens to you, and you're not making any choice. Like, I feel like you don't have a direction, and you're just letting things happen. And apparently that's not attractive to me. And I didn't realize it until this moment.
Yeah, that's perfect example. Perfect example.
I don't know where he is now. So that just made me think
He's
about
listening to this podcast. Shout out.
Oh, yeah. Scott, you're a great guy. I hope you're happy. I also, when I was looking up the definition, and I don't know if this gets to it all, but I right underneath the ridiculous definition, it said, in medicine, intention means a natural process of healing. And that was fascinating to me, because in some ways, if we are intentional, maybe we also heal ourselves, like if we're really, anyway, maybe I'm going a little bit too far, but that was really.
You're not, but you mentioned that we might talk about professional and personal, and that's exactly the direction I would go with personal.
Yeah, right.
Healing is a part of it. Yeah.
So let's do, well, let's talk about professionally, and
Sure.
how do you use the idea of being intentional? And is there a difference between acting with intention and being intentional? I don't know. Talk to me about intention and intentionality in work, and how does that show up for you?
Yeah. I have always found that in our previous work together, and at least you experience this, I've always found that trying to envision a desirable future, or something a little bit beyond realistic, something that requires you to change the status quo and the way you do things in order to reach it, but it is reachable. I've always found that in the institutions, the organizations that I've worked with, when that's done collectively, when it's agreed upon, then you can start backing into the how do we get there, and always continuing to re-anchor on those very clear goals. And so for me, it's a process that I've used over and over again, and it fits me and it works. Excuse me. Of change leadership or change management, of moving an organization from where you are to a future that you can envision. So for me, and that's kind of about setting an intention. Moving with intentionality, I think that's a really interesting question. Had never thought about it. But I think that's then the action. That's the it's revisiting. Instead of just setting up processes, it's continuing to revisit, are we moving in that toward that end? Is what we've learned moving us toward that end? Are we making the choice right now to move toward that end? And I had a friend, we only met a couple times, but he told me a story that, or he gave me a piece of advice that I'd never thought about, but I think it's really about intention. And he basically said, Dale, I believe that if you just decide where you want to be, what you want to be, how you want to be, and then you would just remember that your subconscious takes you there. And he's like, have you ever gone to bed working on a really hard problem, but in the morning, you have resolved it? And he said, that's exactly what I mean. It's your subconscious taking you there. And it works for organizations and institutions too. So I think it's just about re-anchoring, reminding, keeping people moving in the same direction, and managing the natural entropy of life. So,
Oh, that's really good. The
that,
natural entropy.
yeah, and especially among humans, the normal tendency is to pull apart always. And so, like a person that is trying to lead or to shepherd change, half the work is around, hang with it, stay with us, stay the course, be persistent, support your colleague, keeping people swept together and moving in the same direction.
That is interesting, the idea of shepherding change as a way of leading change. I don't think I hear people talk about that enough, but it makes so much sense. And it is reminding people of the intentionality of the work, that this thing that we're doing that seems removed is actually here to get us to there.
Yes, exactly.
And connecting those dots for people who may not have been in the room at the there to see where they fit in that process and how important.
Exactly, Annalisa, and where they've come from.
Yeah.
And also understanding that in an organization or even a group of half a dozen people, everybody has a different way and contribution to getting to there. So it's not about telling people what to do. It's about asking, how are we doing to move toward, in that direction?
Have you found that to be helpful for you? I mean, have you experienced it in your work? Are you experiencing it now? How does that work for you in terms of like a daily practice at work?
So for me, like within my own realm or within the realm of influence that I'm responsible for?
Either one.
I would say it always works, or it has worked very well. And from an organizational point of view, I'll come back to like from a personal point of view in my work, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I see those as slightly different because it depends on role and scope of authority for the second one. But what the process of change that I've really enjoyed and I've used is, let's set our goals, often targets. I'm an engineer. Sometimes they tend to be quantitative.
Yeah.
And
which is fascinating about you, by the way, Dale, this quantitative engineer guy who is like one of the most fascinating storytellers that I know.
Thank you. And then once we've got clarity on that, keep the goals the same, give people freedom for how they reach it, distribute the responsibilities according to strengths. So in a university, that means a college of business may do more fundraising. The College of Science may generate more PhD degrees or do more research, for example. So distribute according to, and then continue to bring people together. We did it on a quarterly basis, a whole campus meeting, hold people up there to doing exceptionally well, look at the data together, and then release everybody again. And I've probably done that at 3 universities in over 30 years. And it's what I'm doing. Annalisa, by the way, crowd is familiar with the work that I do at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but it's the same process that we're using there, and it is working. It influences behavior when the people think they're part of a team, but their own ideas are valued and they're heading in the same direction, and somebody cares when they make good progress toward it. Somebody sees them. Personally, on a day-to-day basis, it has more to do with how I protect my time, how I try to stay strategic rather than bureaucratic, how I try to grow the people around me that are part of the, my partners on the team, because we all get much stronger together. And so it really has to do with managing the chaos that can be part of just doing a job.
How do you like thinking about that intentionality when you're not the leader of what you're doing?
Mhm.
Because I think more people that listen to this podcast will find themselves in that situation.
Sure.
h- how can those folks also lead from where they are with intention? What advice do you have for people in that situation?
I don't know if this has to do with intention, but I have advice.
That's great. We'll take it.
And let me just acknowledge right at the top, people have different needs at different points in their life. We all have kind of this lifelong developmental pathway. And there's a decade or two of building what Latins would call ego, misunderstood in American English culture or in American culture, but really building your identity, knowing what you're good at, knowing what you want to do, knowing where you fit. That doesn't happen the day you get your degree and leave college. It can take a decade, it can take 2 decades. And the reason I'm saying that, Annalise, is because most people will be in that phase that we're talking to probably. And during that time, it's really easy to feel the pressures of unstated expectations from your boss, from your team, from your culture. And it manifests in things like, I need to go to every meeting, I need to show up, I need to show my face, I need to respond to every email. And so I want to acknowledge right here that it's really hard not to get caught up in that, but some ways to manage it. One way is to realize that your mind, it depends on your job, but your ability to think clearly has as much value as all the pieces of paper or emails that you push. And so try to identify and protect time on your calendar. And the key to that is to talk to your boss about it and be clear and have an agreement. Don't try to hide it. Make that part of the value you're creating for your organization. So protect time, but always communicate about it. And if you have a boss that says, I don't respect that, then, that's a different kind of challenge. That's like a cultural challenge that you would have to think about yourself. And then figure out what the big rocks every day are, the ones that move those priorities, and make sure that you make progress or get those done. That's the 80-20 rule. I have to say, even at the age that I am at a very advanced age, even at my stage in life, there are times when I'm a little bit brain dead. And so it's easier just to go through 55 emails and sort of process them than it is just to shut that off and to write the 3 pages of, something that needs thought. So I'm going a little far, but these are some ideas.
I totally understand that. I think it is really profound, your statement about the unstated expectations about pushing paper, being in 5 million meetings, like the things that we're doing, but rather than who we are that we bring to the table. And it is figuring out that balance and then finding a way to advocate for it. I have an example that just about 4 years ago, maybe, I was so busy in meetings all the time, just busy, that I had this problem that I needed to solve. And it felt so overwhelming. It was just, I had no idea how I was going to solve it. And I wasn't sleeping at night because I didn't know how to solve it at work and I didn't know what to do. And then I shut down meetings for a day at work and said, I've got to solve it. And literally having no meetings, the answer was actually pretty simple. And it came to me relatively quickly when I didn't have all those other things. And it was such a good lesson for me that I needed some quiet time to let my brain actually do the work it needed to do.
Yeah. I have this image that I've got a hole in the top of my head and things just keep pouring in. And what happens is the things that I need to think about need to float to the top. And sometimes you just have to make that space. But if you can make that space on a daily basis or 3 times a week, those kind of things don't become so overwhelming.
I love that. So I was thinking about, I did some research on this idea of intention, and I found this information from the Center for Creative Leadership talking about intention at work. And they emphasize 3 aspects, and I'm interested in your thoughts on those, which one is, they actually said 3 aspects of living with intention, both at work and at home. So this is, intention goes across all of our areas of our lives. One was, the first step is to gain clarity by identifying your values. And I am really interested in that in terms of organizationally, how important it is to know your mission, vision, values, and actually know the values of the organization, and then your own as they align with that place. And then, go ahead.
I was going to see if you're going through all 3 of them before I react to that.
Yeah, no, please speak to that. I think that's really fascinating.
Well,
it's the first thing.
Yeah. First of all, a statement, then a story. The statement is, and especially for people that are earlier in their careers, well, no, I think it's everyone. You're never going to have a dream job, or you're rarely going to have a dream job. And almost every job, even if we're running our own businesses, there's like 50 to 60% of just stuff that has to get done, and 40 to 50% of stuff that really moves the ball. And you just have to accept that, acknowledge that, and carve out the time and expectation to just do that drudgery work or that, transactional work. So that's one thing. I had a
friend, Dale, that called that, his advice to me was, embrace the suck. That even the best relationship has parts to it that suck. That there's always going to be something. So embrace it.
Every morning, just expect to have that. And when you get it, you know it. And then make sure you have time for the rest of it, the fun part. And then and just to finish that, too many people leave a job because their expectations don't match that. But now I'm going to talk to you about alignment of values, which I think is a good reason to take or leave a job. I'm just going to be straight up here. I went through a real journey in my life around equity, around racial equity. And it started in 1992 when I was part of the Kellogg National Leadership Development Program. And in this fellowship, there were 40 of us. And I think that I was brought on as the token Texas white racist guy from the country that, actually, I think that's a little overstatement, but I was definitely the most conservative and traditional out of the 40. And I went on a long journey there, and I'm still continuing that journey. And everybody's story, everybody's value, and the understanding of historic harm and structural bias I came to understand in very experiential ways with people that I really cared a lot about. So that has been a value for me, that everybody has the opportunity to thrive, and that means acknowledging structural problems. I worked 3 decades of my life in Texas, Indiana, and Florida in public universities. And it got consistently harder and harder to live my values. I left Purdue, I left Indiana for that reason, because of a change in leadership and an expectation that we were going to do away with diversity. That may be an overstatement, but it was the action. And I left Florida really for the same reason. And now and so what I'm saying is, I had a personal value. I liked a lot of my job, but there was something about my job that never aligned. And it was the inability to speak out about racial injustice. And so when I got to the Gates Foundation, I found it was exactly the opposite. It was almost like you were expected to. And it took me a while to get used to that culture, but it felt so freeing to me. And it was the first time that I felt like my work is totally aligned with my values. There's still this bureaucracy and drudgery, and embrace the suck part of it. But the work we're doing matters, and the words we're using matter. And so I think that's the one thing, and Lisa, to your number one point, that really you have to find an alignment with the culture of your workplace and those values that are most important to you. It may not be all of your values, but those that are really core to who you are.
Gosh, that's important. And it's funny. If we talk about it, I actually feel a little bit weepy. And I don't mean to, but I'm really worried about how we're talking about equity, and what's happening in our society. I just moved, as I talked to you about, and because July 1st, we're recording this in July of 2024, and July 1st was the date that all of the state institutions in Utah had to change their structure, so they didn't have specific centers based on equity, and so all of the Women's Resource Center or the Black Student Union don't exist anymore. And it's just it's really hard and scary. And I wonder what this conversation that we're having about aligning with your values,
Yeah.
it will change the way that universities are structured in different states in our country. Because people will either say hard things and put their careers on the line, or they'll move.
Yeah, I think, saying hard things and putting your careers on the line, we can have a discussion about that as well. I moved, by the way, and I said hard things and I put my career on the line.
Which is also, I didn't finish my PhD, but I wrote a paper about that, about that's when we care deeply and passionately about something, and it's not aligned with our values, we have choices. And that this is actually literally the next stage in what the Center for Creative Leadership talks about, which is identify your values. And the second is act with agency. That is how we are intentional, is you have agency to deal with it. And some of it clearly has consequences, but there's agency that we all have in living our lives.
I think saying that as well, Annalise, is that to some extent, agency is a privilege that not everybody has.
Absolutely. 100%.
Not everybody can leave a job. Not everybody can move out of a community. And that's something that you have to acknowledge. And some people just have to live with resilience and try to do the best for their kids, their community and their family.
And it's an interesting thing in terms of those with privilege who can leave. Can they use their agency to speak up instead? Like, what is their role in terms of, anyway, super interesting, and really hard.
I
very
I
nuanced.
think speaking up does matter. I think that we need to give people grace as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And, and there's also the concept of time and process and speaking up with a lot of other people, organization. So we can have a whole nother discussion about that. But I'm still, there was a time recently in my life where that kind of core piece of who I am that always believes everybody is doing what they think is the right thing. It just may be different than what I think is the right thing. They're doing it for the right reason. That got really shaken at one point in my life. I had a hard time believing that having a hard time believing in everybody. And I've got to say that that's come back. It's part of that intentional healing, part of living on an island, by the way, part of thinking my own thoughts. Where was I going with that?
Oh, I love that
I had
this
to,
showed up as intentional healing too.
yeah,
Because thinking about your values and how others.
oh, I was, to wrap that, I was thinking about believing in democracy. You know, at some point, the crowd will speak.
Yeah.
And for every radical swing, there will be a swing back. And you're just starting to see it happen in Europe in July of 2024, when there was
Yeah.
my basic belief is to believe in people and to believe in like the concept of a democracy, meaning a lot of people have the wisdom.
This goes to I love this because I literally wrote down, if we're talking about intentional, is it worth us talking also about positive intent and assuming positive intent in others, and how that applies to our professional and personal lives? I feel like you've already talked about it.
99.9% of the time, it's definitely, for me, it's always been the way to go.
Yeah.
And what results from that is the other person feels empowered and grows, trust grows, and productivity, like if it's you and I, our joint productivity just is so much higher. There's no question.
I was reading an article that said, however, that assumption of assuming positive intent is tricky because all of us have experiences where we know someone who says, I am doing this with good intentions, and then we can't believe the way they acted and whether it was really true, right? Like there's
words and actions are not always aligned.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where people talk that through. So anyway,
yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about intentionality and how that shows up for you in your personal life as well?
We can.
Let's do.
Okay, I'd be happy to. Where do you want to start?
Anywhere. I was thinking, I mean, this is like really goes somewhere, but I do this research and just see what shows up when I Google ideas of intention and intentionality. And I found this amazing article in the maybe you've listened in the past to the On Being podcast, or you've read some of their stuff. It's Krista Tippett. She used to be on NPR. Anyway, I was reading about it, and you should, because it's super interesting. But there was a discussion that I read about like Buddhism and intention and karma, and how what we actually put out in the world through our intention like shows up for us in our lives. And so, I mean, that's like really going somewhere, but how about that for a prompt?
I'll think about that one. I have so many thoughts about that.
Can I just
let's do it this way.
I will say, in my position as a fundraiser, in my last role, I hired every single person on the team. And when I did, I sent them this book, The Soul of Money. And some of that book I love, and some of it I don't love, but there's a part in The Soul of Money that I love that was about donor, and like that we all get money and it flows through us. None of us actually own it because it comes and then it leaves. And so it's a river, right? And some of us have giant rivers and some of us have little streams, but it still happens. And that we have intention, especially if we have any extra, whether it's 10 cents or whether it's 5 million, if we have any, there's intention that we infuse into that money that's going out into the world. And it's a way I liked my team to think about any funding that was coming into our organization, that it was infused with some values that were important to honor. So
Yeah,
does that exist in your personal and or professional life?
it does. And I would say for me, it's time. So for me, it's the 90, is
The
it
most precious
92,000
resource.
hours?
Yeah, 92,000.
That made me think. Um, in the last 5 years, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to spend time, and just a few things. One is I really have, when I was so busy and so important and so structured and so in demand, meaning that I let other people decide what I was going to do with my time. And it got to the point, on Lisa, where I let other people put words in my mouth and influence my thoughts tremendously, because there were so many things to get done. It was like, you're the professional. You tell me on that. You tell me on that. Where I am
He's
now
the
is,
president of a university. That happens to people. That would make sense. Yeah.
yeah. Um, I when I left that job and just for your audience, um, I didn't leave that job intentionally. I thought I was going to be university president for the next 10 years. And I really got into a conflict with the new governor. It got manifest in a different way. It got manifest in the way that my predecessor used money. But it was really an issue with the new governor, and our values were different. Um, and it ended up in me making what I thought was a serious leadership decision to do what was best for the institution rather than what was best for me. And I think if I was going to be university president, that decision really hurt my career. I didn't know there was anything after that. So the intention that I lived with was, how am I going to spend my time? How am I going to learn what my path is? How is my life going to matter? And
Can
does
you
it matter if
imagine the soul searching you were doing at that time? This
it
must have been
was,
like really hard on your identity and your like, yeah, I can't even imagine.
yeah, a lot of it had to do with letting go, forgiving, and not holding a grudge, and starting to believe that a half a dozen of people that were personally ambitious instead of ambitious for other people, um, they remain the exception and not the rule. Even though they get a lot of airtime, they remain the exception and not the rule. Anyway,
That's
the
actually
things that I
beautiful,
really
and
loved.
that's
Sorry.
actually beautiful and important that those folks are the exception and not the rule.
Yeah, and just when I mentioned ambition, um, when we talk about leadership, I think that the great leaders are people who have, and it goes back to intentionality for the organization, have great ambitions for their organization. The people who have great ambitions for themselves are changing jobs all the time, or trying to find the next best dollar. They're trying to get a better title. So I had ambitions for the organization, and I think I left in as good a shape as I could. So I came away from that with a lot of trauma, and to your point, kind of just trying to figure out, so who am I?
Mm-hmm.
And I decided that I was going to continue to notice the really small things. In fact, I didn't decide that. I didn't decide anything, to be honest, Annalisa. I tried to make decisions. I tried to figure out what my future was. I tried to be intentional about healing, and none of that worked. So what I did was I just started painting and exercising and hiking and rowing and consulting. I had good friends that brought me in. And all of that grew. And now let me just say that I'm very intentional about how much time I save for my own mind, for the small things, for exercise. I get up at 5 o'clock every morning. I have a ritual. I make
Mm,
coffee, take it to my wife in bed. I
love
go
it.
out and get on the water for 2 to 3 hours, and
Wow.
then I shower and do my gates work. Um, and then in the evenings, we, take care of the cabin here, walk in the woods, do whatever we need to do. Um,
I heard that
so
from you, Dale, that you said something to me when I asked you once, I asked you something about what was important to you in your life. I think I was looking for my own sense of what was important to me. And it stuck with me because you told me how important it was to you to live where you want to live and have
yeah.
have these moments that matter to you because that's how you make a life of meaning for yourself.
And we're in a small community that we're very rooted in,
Hmm.
which we've never been before. We've always followed the job. And, the job was where we lived.
Yeah.
So, Annalise, I want to tell you a story about a little time.
Okay.
Um, I remember when the stress was highest, this was down in Florida, and trying to make a decision about what I was going to do with the future. And I went laid on the pool deck by the pool and looked up, hoping I wasn't having a heart attack, and looked up, and um, the image that kept coming to my mind, it came to me every time I felt stressful, was sweeping the cabin floor with all the windows open and a little bit of sunshine on the floor of the cabin, not a single sound except the birds, and a little bit of dust in the sunshine. And I realize, and when I come here and I feel those moments, I realize how special those are and how I didn't have them when I was overprogrammed in a concrete city, driving an air-conditioned car, and living in a different way. I'm not trying to be critical of most people who live that way. It's just that it was a change for me, and it was an intent. It was not intentional. But the way I live it is intentional.
I love it so much because it is, I mean, I know it sounds hoo-ha, hoo-hoo, like woo, but it's like this whole, that idea of getting quiet and listening to whatever yourself is telling you. I don't know. In some ways, there's like such incredible beauty about you living with intentionality, understanding your values, acting with agency. And then in some way, that whole thing that I talked about, that there was this idea of intentionality and karma, but in some ways, karma showed up for
Yeah,
you in a really positive way to lead you to the life that you may not have gotten to.
absolutely. Mary and I talk about that all the time. It was never our intent. It was hell to go through, and we are so grateful. We are so grateful. We could have been 80 years old and never have gotten to the life that was really us.
Yeah, that
And
fits
now
you.
we're launching a business together.
You are.
So
What
I'm
is that?
intentional about retiring and from working for somebody else, and intentional about launching a business.
What is
It
your
is
new book?
an art gallery. I am an artist. I sell, and a retreat center, Quilter's Retreat. And so
So
we
with
will.
her.
Yeah,
This is what
it
Mary
is.
does, right?
That's right. It will be our joint business. So we have this. We're being very intentional about it, and it's for our next 10 to 15 years.
Oh my gosh, it's your joy. You're going to find your
Yeah,
bliss.
exactly.
I love that so much. So I have to tell you that I was reading about you and I can't help it because this is so funny to me and perfectly appropriate. It's about your personal life. So I'm reading about you in UCF magazine, and it's like get to know Dale, and it's that literally use this word. I hadn't intended, so you use something about intentional, to go out, but she was so intriguing. And it was about how you met Mary, that you had not intended, but then, so you were not your, so I'm really interested in that. Like you used intended, intentional in the language, and now we're talking about that. So talk to me about those things that show up in your life that it might be unintentional, but you can tell there's something about it that you should be following. And for you, that was, you didn't intend to go on a date with your wife, but your whole life changed in beautiful ways as a result.
I think that's seren- I think it's karma, not serendipity. I think that's karma, and Lisa. Um, I think that we overestimate our personal agency at times in terms of the ability to control our path to that future. Um, I think that idea of intentionality I started out with about imagine a future and your subconscious will take you there. Um, Sometimes you just have to allow things to unwind and realize that instinct in your gut, in your feelings, are as valid of intention, of a representation of intention as rational thought, and accept that.
I totally agree. There's like that whole get quiet and listen to your gut a little bit, and there's wisdom there.
Yeah.
It's really interesting too, because for as we were talking about it, that third aspect from the Center for Creative Leadership said the whole agency is know your values and then act with agency. And then the third one was optimize the people around you, like have good partnerships or good relationships. And that's how you will live with intention. Think critically about who you surround yourself with.
Yeah, and you have to invest in them, and Lisa. You
Yes.
know, it yeah, it's about not just choosing, but accepting the people around you and that alignment and believing in them and investing in them. That's where the karma comes back. Um,
That's true.
Too
And
many
it's
people make it
simple.
about themselves,
Yeah.
make it about, but if you just allow it not to be about yourself, and invest in them, then, but at the same time, when people are taking, it's kind of like being with a job where you're not aligned in the values. There are times you just have to walk away from people. You don't really owe anybody anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are times when the partnership, the teamwork, or whatever, just doesn't
It's not right.
is not healthy. Might be the best way to say it. Yeah, and you have to be able to recognize that and be mature and communicative and leave that situation. Or at least
It,
not invest in it.
it's hard, but also important. So I want to make sure I'm acknowledging your time. And I think that this idea of like talking about who we spend our time with. And for me, the lovely story is that I get a chance to spend time with you. And then the story about you spending time meeting your wife, and how in the end, this is going to turn into like a story of finding yourselves on this island that turns into the next phase of your career that wouldn't
No
have come if
question.
you had all this, which is
We didn't know each
beautiful.
other till we left Florida and were locked down for COVID. We didn't know each other during 30 years of our marriage in the way that we have in the last 10 years of our marriage.
I believe, you know, what I learned during COVID is how much I actually really love my family, like actually like them as human beings. It for me, it
Yeah.
was a good experience in that aspect, that I was like, I could have been a homesteader. I could spend all day long with you and still like you and want to spend more time. So that was good. Um, I mentors are so important to me. And I've told you this in the past before, but I consider you a mentor of mine, even if you don't know that you are, I deeply appreciate the time that you've given me when you haven't had to, and the ability to talk to you about things that were not completely structured on this path we were supposed to be talking about, but allowed me and yourself to be human in the conversation, which opened up pathways for me of learning about things that I would never have known about. So thank you so much for being a mentor to me. I still will keep learning from you. And I would love to open up time for you to talk a little bit about anyone that has been a mentor to you that, you know, you could acknowledge here and honor them in some way.
Okay, and Lisa, I worked hard on this, thought hard about this, and it's
Good.
not an obvious answer for me. Um, because there have been so many meaningful people in my life. But I have to say that um, I have learned the most and grown the most when with people who saw me as a mentor. And I struggle with that because a lot of times it's like one person knows the answer and the other one is learning it. And it turns out for me to be exactly the opposite. It's more like the people who I find interesting and fascinating and fun, and I care about who they're going to be when they're 75. And it's kind of random. It's like I mean, you coming into my life, it's kind of random who those people are, and it's not intentional.
Maybe
But
the person at the coffee shop, that woman we talked about.
Exactly. And she and I are still very, very close. And it's a little bit like, I didn't intend to go out with Mary, but decided to put down my math homework and go ahead and go. It just happens, and it in the moment. You actually know it in the moment that you're going to be with this person, watching them grow, watching them make choices. And sometimes you've had an experience that they're about ready to go through, and maybe that's seen as mentorship. So what I have to say, the way I have to answer your question is I have grown and received the most through people who are developing and building their lives, and they're very human, and they're willing to share it, and they're willing to be vulnerable, and I'm willing to be vulnerable, and it's a side by side. And I find that so much fun, and I become so much richer from those relationships. So I'm going to call that a mentor relationship.
I love that so much. I think that I agree with you. When people have asked me that question before, at the time I was at a university, and I said, oh my goodness, it's the students who think I'm their mentor, but they are my mentors. I am learning so much
Spot
from
on.
them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah, and it's real.
the joy of working in that type of an environment is being surrounded by folks that are becoming, as you said.
Yeah, exactly. That's one thing I miss, by the way.
Yeah.
You're missing it.
So you look for it in other ways.
Yeah. Exactly.
What a joy to have this conversation with you and for you to spend time with me. And all of the listeners, I know that people will want to follow up with me and will be so grateful for the conversation as well. Thank you so much, Dale, for spending your time.
Thank you, Annalisa, for inviting me.
I know that time is
a
the most precious resource, and I appreciate that you gave us this time.
You're very welcome.
My deep gratitude to Dale for his honesty and his brilliance. This discussion was the epitome of how I wanted to end the Changemaker guest series. Dale is wise, interesting, thoughtful, and definitely authentic. And he brought his whole self to this interview. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can learn more about him at his personal website, which is www.realdalewhitaker.com. And Whittaker is spelled Whittaker. You can even look him up on Wikipedia if you want. He has a Wikipedia page. And you can connect with him on LinkedIn as well. Thank you so much, Dale. We've now reached the end of our Changemaker series, but we have one more bonus episode for you next week. You see, the team members at 92,000 Hours met, and we talked about what we learned this season and reflected on some of the lessons. It was fun for us to put it all together and to make some sense out of it. And while we do this, you'll be able to see some of the other folks behind the scenes here at 92,000 Hours. That will mark the last episode of the season, so please join us next week. I think you'll find it worth your while. See you then.